Funding for this program is made possible by the members of WETA.
Do you have the courage to change? If you've been saying and doing something over and over again, do you have the courage to change?
Now look what you've done. That's what we tell kids sometimes after they've spilled a drink or dropped an easy fly ball. It's no wonder so many children feel like failures. But how do some kids manage to bounce back from disappointment instead of just giving up? Dr. Robert Brooks has spent 25 years listening to children, and you'll be surprised by what he's learned. Discover how we can nurture hope and resilience in every child, and how we can build on each child's areas of strength. Please join us for Look What You've Done. And now, please welcome Dr. Bob Brooks.
Some people have often asked me, how did you get so interested in children with learning disabilities and ADD, and especially the whole topic of self-esteem and motivation? And one of the reasons I got so interested in it was how miserably I failed for the first about 7 or 8 years of my career with children with learning disabilities and ADD. And when I say failed miserably, I really mean it. I still remember one of my first patients. He'd be in his mid-40s now. At the time, he was a young, angry teenager. The very first session, right before he came in, he had gotten into this major argument with his mother. So he started his first therapy session with me with the following statement: "I feel like killing my mother." That was his opening comment. And I remember I was sitting there saying, this sounds important. This sounds important. It has to do with a basic relationship here. And I hate to tell you what my next thought was. Why'd you have to tell me? I don't know what to say back. And what seemed like 20 minutes later, I'm sure it was only about 10 seconds, all I could think of saying to this kid was, "Don't do it, you'll get in trouble." And I said, I wonder if this is therapy. When I look back and think about the things I said and did with my patients, I'm ashamed, but I didn't know better. Hyperactive kids would come into my office. You know the first thing I would tell hyperactive kids? Have a seat. Why would you ever tell a hyperactive kid to have a seat and expect them to look at you and say, "You are such a helpful therapist, you're really tuned in"? I would tell kids with learning problems, if only you tried harder, you'd do better. When I look back, I think of all these lives, and I had no handle on what I was doing. This is why, by the way, I tell all of the student teachers I train and all of the mental health professionals I train, save the addresses of your first patients or your first students. And some people say, why? And I say it's going to be very obvious at some point in your career, because at some point in your career, you're going to want to write them a note. The note would say, "I am so sorry. I had absolutely no idea what I was doing. I hope you turned out okay anyway," right? By about the 7th year of my career, I started to burn out. I was getting angry at the very kids and their parents who I was supposed to be helping. And I looked myself in the mirror, and I must tell you something. I did not like the person I was becoming. And I did a lot of soul searching. And I thought back to why I wanted to become a psychologist, to help people. And I said, what has gone wrong here? One of the reasons I was doing so poorly with these children and their parents was because I had no understanding, none at all, about what these kids were going through. I had no understanding of what they were experiencing. I said all the wrong things, not because I was a malevolent person, but because I didn't put myself in their shoes. And one of the most important things on this journey of mine that was to change my life was when I recognized that one of the most important skills any of us could ever develop in any relationship is the skill of empathy. Because one of the things I discovered is you can have the greatest strategies in the world as parents or teachers, but if you can't be empathic, none of these strategies will work. Empathy means that you put yourself inside the shoes of another person and truly see the world through their eyes. Empathy is not sympathy, which has to do with feeling sorry for. Empathy doesn't even mean you agree with someone. It is very easy to be empathic. towards those children of ours who listen to us, who actually do what we request, who make us feel good as parents, and on and on. Do you know what I discovered the hard way? It is very difficult to be empathic when you are upset, angry, disappointed, or annoyed with another person. And let me give you a real-life experience this way. My oldest son, Richard, is now 28 years old. He's a wonderful kid, and we have a wonderful relationship. Richard was a classic underachiever in the 8th, 9th, 10th, and 11th grades. I bet many of you could guess what the first question was when I came home from work every night. You know what it was? Rich, you do your homework. And for 4 years he'd say, yup. You think he did it? Nope. Now I want to make a point. In about the 4th year of my asking him the first thing, did you do your homework? This lovely son saw me coming towards him and basically rolled his eyes in disgust and walked away from me. I started to tear up. I felt I was losing my son. You know how easy it is to lose our children? Very easy psychologically, when they feel we no longer believe in them or whatever. You know what an empathic father would have asked himself after maybe asking his son just for over 2-3 weeks, did you do your homework? An empathic father would have asked this question. I wonder how my son Richard experiences it when the first thing I ask him when I come home from work is, did you do your homework? Because if I would have asked that question and answered it, I would have realized that the moment I asked him that question, it was like a knife in his heart because it was destroying our relationship. I wasn't empathic. I never put myself in his shoes. I never saw the world through his eyes. And by the way, if I was very bright, don't you think after about 3 months, I would have said to myself, I don't think this is working. I really don't think this is working. He has not changed his behavior. But I got so stuck. Do you know that our children are very perceptive in knowing which parents enjoy being a parent or which teachers enjoy being a teacher? They're very perceptive in knowing which people, the adults in their lives, have given up on them and which believe in them. You can't hide that. This is what I ask kids when they come into my office. Describe your mother to me. Describe your father to me. Describe your teacher to me. When you spill a glass of water at home, what do your parents do? That's one of my favorite questions. It really is. I learn a lot about how parents react to just normal childhood lapses in attention. Tell me about one of the most precious moments you ever had with your mom. Tell me about a moment you would just as soon forget about. Tell me about one of the most precious moments you had with your dad. Tell me about a moment you just as soon forget about. You see, my whole approach now is to put myself inside the shoes of the children and ask, how do they experience the world? You see, one of the things I learned is unless we as parents and teachers, mental health professionals, do that, we will never understand another person. We will never understand our children. Now, as I was struggling during this period of what I call almost burnout, as I was struggling with trying to understand, how would my patients describe me? What are they going through? These kids with learning problems and attentional problems, what are they going through? Maybe I'm not very effective because I don't understand what they're going through. What I decided to do was to invite my patients to write stories in therapy about their lives. Little did I realize what a gold mine of information was going to come from these stories. You see, many of these kids I saw in the initial part of my career, I saw them as resistant, oppositional, they weren't trying hard enough, on and on and on. And yet, when I looked at their stories, I saw some of the greatest pain in their lives. I saw such distress I never imagined. And I said, I have totally missed the boat. I have totally missed the boat on what these kids need. They don't need adults reminding them every night of their homework. They don't need adults telling them everything they're doing wrong. What many of these kids need are really a boost for their self-esteem. The first boy I want to tell you about is now a young man, but I met him when he was a freshman in high school. I found him to be one of the most gentle, kind, considerate kids. And I think any one of you, if you had the opportunity to meet him, you'd feel the same way. But the moment I mentioned school to him, his whole body totally tensed up, just totally. And I said, what is it? He said, I don't know, Dr. Brooks, but sometimes thinking about school just gets me very upset. And he wrote about his experiences in school. And when he came to his fourth grade teacher, he was really very upset, and he said, oh, God, I had a teacher in the fourth grade who used to say to me all the time, you're lazy, you're unmotivated, you're never going to amount to anything, you better get your rear end in gear. I said, really? He really said that? Yeah. And I spoke to his mother, and she said, I think the teacher thought he was encouraging us. He used to call us all the time and say, you have one of the laziest kids, and you better help to motivate him. Well, let me tell you a little about this lazy, unmotivated kid. He did get back to high school, and he is a magnificent artist. So I asked him to draw a picture of how he thought his teacher saw him every day in the fourth grade. Sick in the brain. This is a handsome kid. You'd never know it from that picture. He said, every time the teacher looked at me, I felt what he was saying is, you know, you're so sick in the brain. I then asked him to draw a picture of his teacher. One boy's image of his teacher. The kid on the right is saying, thank God it's him and not me again. And you know where work sets you free comes from? It's the slogan on the Nazi death camps. Interesting, one kid's remembrance. And even more graphically, you know what else he did? As part of his autobiography, he wrote a letter to this teacher. He never sent it, but he did something I thought was far more creative. He had it published in the literary magazine of his high school. Let me just read you part of it. One thing I remember vividly about your class was how dedicated you were to each student. You were even to me. Do you remember how you used to yell at me to try to make me understand my math facts? I realize your motives behind that now that I'm older. You simply were pushing to try to make me work harder and harder, since I often sat through math class just staring at the paper. You kept saying what a lazy thing to do. Did you ever ask yourself, maybe I didn't understand math? When I asked you for help, I guess you had a perfect right to be annoyed. You kept saying, why don't you listen more carefully in the first place? Now, just to skip ahead, what happens when you have adults like this? What happens to a kid's psyche? Here's a diary he kept. I flunked my spelling test again, and what's even worse is that this time I thought I could pass it. Instead, I got 9 wrong. It's probably my fault. I didn't study hard enough. Mr. So-and-so is right. I am lazy and I have no excuse. You actually start to believe what the adults tell you. And then it erodes your self-esteem and your confidence, and then when you come into rockier moments in your life, you just seem to give up because of how vulnerable your self-esteem is. There's a loss of hope. Now, this was a teacher who's not very good. Let me tell you about one of the best teachers I ever worked with in Massachusetts. And the teacher said, Bob, I'm getting concerned about this girl. She has learning problems, reading difficulties, attentional problems. The girl was trying so hard to pay attention in school that she would clutch her desk very hard, almost like an anchor to pay attention. And the teacher said, in the process, the palms of her hands were sweaty all day long. And the girl herself reported she was having headaches in school. I meet this girl, and what this girl was to teach me was some of the most important things I've ever learned from a child. In the very first session, she said to me, Dr. Brooks, I have trouble learning and paying attention. She also said that she thought she was the only child in the whole school with that problem. I said to her, many children have trouble learning and paying attention. I know, I work with a lot of them. But I bet a lot of them think they're the only ones in the whole world with this problem. And when you think you're the only one with a problem, it makes it feel even worse. I'm not sure she understood what I was saying, but I wanted to get to the next part. I said, would you be willing to do me a favor? She said, what? Would you be willing to write a story about what it feels like to have trouble learning and paying attention that I could then read to teachers, parents, other doctors like me, and children so they could understand what it feels like and be more helpful? She came in and she said, I thought of a story. And I thought she was going to write a story. Once upon a time, there was a little girl who had trouble paying attention and learning. No, she said, could I write a story about a dog called Hyper? I said, whatever you want to do. You tell me who you think Hyper is. Hyper felt very frustrated and sweaty. That was the same term the teacher used, because she wasn't able to concentrate on her work. She wished she would have time and go out and play at recess with the other puppies, but she couldn't finish her work. I said to myself, you do not have to be a brilliant therapist to assume Hyper must really be her. Hyper told herself that she would get over this problem someday, but she wondered if she really would. She was worried that when she grew up and her own puppies asked her something, she would not know the answer, and they would wonder why their mother was not very smart. Thinking about this made Hyper feel so upset, and she just didn't know what to do about it. Think about what the 7-year-old girl is saying. She has lost one of the most important commodities in life. You know what that is? It starts with the letter H. It's hope. Do you know what I started to discover as I collected these kids' stories? Not only did they have low self-esteem now, many of them, as they looked at their future, had given up hope. And you know what I started to say to every mental health professional and teacher and parent? What do we do every day of our child's life to generate hope? What are the things you do so that as our children look towards the future, they can see a more hopeful future? Because in story after story after story that I collected, I must tell you, the loss of hope was such a prominent theme. The next paragraph. Hyper's mother could see Hyper was very upset. She said, Hyper, try not to be so upset. I just heard all about a dog named Dr. Bark who's helping at least 30 other puppies right now with your problem. I said, oh my God, I'm Dr. Bark. So I did what any good therapist would do. You know what I did? I went, woof, woof, and we were off. Her teacher, who was wonderful, had this child, when the story was 3 pages long, the child read it in front of the whole class. The kid loved reading it. And she's now just a lovely, lovely young lady. But at one point, she had given up hope. Many of us fail to use our own memories of school or of our childhood to guide what we do today as adults. When I go into schools, I will say to a 4th grade teacher, do you every day think about what it was like for you in the 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade? What were the things the teacher said or did that turned you on to learning? And what did they do that upset you? What I'd love to do is have volunteers come up here and share some of their experiences in school, one positive and one negative memory. Do I have any volunteers? 1, 2, 3. And while our volunteers are coming up, what I'd like each of you to do is to think about one positive and one negative memory you have of school, and ask yourself, how can I use these memories to be more effective parents and teachers? And now we have all of our guests. Hey guys, of different ages, as we see. Okay. And now what I would like you to do, why don't we start with the positive first, and just say your name, and then we will take it from there.
My name is Athena, and one of the most positive memories I have is from a college professor. I was taking a literature course, and I've been writing poetry since I was about 12. And she asked me to come into class and read some of my poetry to my classmates, but not tell them that I had actually written the poetry, and let them guess who had written the poems, and they guessed names like Maya Angelou and Toni Morrison.
Wow.
So it made me feel really good.
I am Samantha, and I remember when I was in 1st grade, my teacher brought up about a book called Cookies Week, and everybody was calling me Cakey, my mom's nickname. And everybody started calling me Cookie, and the teacher told them to stop, and I hated that. And they they kept on calling me that until the teacher finally got them to stop by putting them in timeout until they stopped.
But so that teacher really protected you.
Yeah.
You know what I love about that example is sometimes we don't realize that kids need some protection in school, or especially when they're, other kids are making fun of them. That sounds like a very special teacher. I'm glad she did it, Samantha.
Miss Walters.
Miss Walters. Miss Walters, if you're watching, thank you very much. That's wonderful. Yeah.
My name is Fern, and my most positive experience came when I was in high school. I was very shy when I was in school, and although I didn't have a problem making friends, it's just I kind of always held back. I mean, once I made the friends, I was fine. I was very good with people. And what ended up happening was that I had an English teacher who saw how good I was with people. And so what ended up happening is she asked me to be her teaching assistant,
Oh,
which led to my going to college to get my degree in early childhood education because of that.
see, that's wonderful because one of the most common positive memories I get is when a teacher asks someone in the school, in this case, students, to help out in some way. And that's what the teacher did. It was also a wonderful way to have you start to relate to kids in a much more comfortable way.
My name is Brian, and when I was a junior in high school, I tried out to be drum major in the high school band, and my music instructor chose me. And I went from being someone who was very shy and sort of meek, and he turned me into someone who could actually lead a member of the 125-member band. And after 2 years, he said that it was a really great transformation that I had, and it was really a good pleasure. It was a great pleasure for him to work with me.
Wow. You know what I want to tell both of you? There were a number of memories that I collected that were very similar to your two, where someone felt very reserved, shy, hesitant, and a teacher found a way of bringing them out by finding their talents and having them display their talents. And once they started to display their talents, then they felt much more comfortable. Okay, Brian. Now, what about a
Enough of
negative
that.
memory?
Well, I was always kind of a larger than the other kids a little bit, and in 8th grade, one of the football coach approached me and said that I had to be on the football team because they needed big kids to be on the team. So I tried out, and after the first day of tryouts, he cut me and said that I had no athletic ability whatsoever, which I later proved him wrong. So.
Good for you. That is funny. You know, what that gets to, as much as we can laugh about it, is many of the negative memories also had to do with when someone was told they would never amount to anything in life. You know, you'd never be any good. Why even go to college? You'll never succeed at college. And I think it's very unfair for anyone to write off any child or adolescent. So I'm glad you showed them.
I'd always had an interest in dance and music and the arts, and my 6th grade teacher was holding tryouts for it was, I guess you could call it it was like a dance-a-thon. Well, I tried out for it, and it took a lot for me to muster up the courage to do it because I was very shy. I didn't like performing in front of groups of people, and so when I tried out for it, the teacher told me I didn't have any talent.
Wow.
Which really brought me down. It lowered my self-esteem. I mean, for someone to tell me I did not have talent. And it took me all the way until I went to college to actually get out in front of people again. I couldn't do it because I always remembered what my teacher told me is the fact that I didn't have that talent.
The pain stays. We actually have teachers looking back at their own childhood from 40 years ago start to cry when they recall some of the memories they have. And those are very, very painful.
I have another memory when I was doing PE, and every time we were doing push-ups, I always started falling because my arms were weak at that time, but now I've gotten stronger, and everybody insulted me because of that.
Oh. It's so tough when you're being teased or hurt in school. And our last negative memory.
In 6th grade, they were having tryouts for a countywide chorus, and there were 3 slots available, and there were 3 of us trying out, and I was the 3rd person to try out, and my music teacher told me, well, sure, you can be in the chorus, but only because no one else tried out.
Wow. I've known actually people who have kept from attempting things in life because of those early messages. They play a very difficult role. Well, I think all of you deserve really a loud round of applause here. Thank you. Thank you very much. Many researchers ask resilient people, look back at your childhood. What do you think was the most important thing in your childhood to help you to overcome adversity? The most important thing was they felt there was at least one adult who truly believed in them and stood by them. In a wonderful article written by a psychologist who died last year, Julius Siegel, he called this one adult a charismatic adult. He said every kid, if they're to be resilient, needs at least one adult who believes in them and stands by them. And do you know how many young adults I've talked with who can't think of one person? You know how many of them have felt every person in their life, including parents and teachers, have been prosecuting attorneys rather than their defense attorney? It's very interesting. And yet we have this research. That person finds the kid's strengths. And as some of you know, one of the things that I talk about is that every child has islands of competence or areas of strength. If I met with you as parents or teachers within a minute, you know what I would ask you if you were discussing your child with me? I'd say, can you now describe this child's islands of competence? When I go into schools, when a teacher tells me what a kid's strengths are, you know what I love to do? I love to walk around the school building so that that teacher can show me where the kid's strengths are displayed for the whole school to see. What good is it to list strengths on an educational plan unless we use them? Telling a kid with low self-esteem they're wonderful is important, but most of them don't believe it, you know. You know what I hear in therapy all the time? You paid good money to say that, Brooks. My mother has to say it. She's my mother. My father has to say it. I want to tell you a story that is probably one of the most powerful moments I ever experienced in therapy, a moment that convinced me of the power of a mother's words to change her daughter forever. Years ago, I was referred a girl who was 10 years old at the time. She had learning and attentional problems. She was scapegoated in school. She had few friends. But one of her main problems, if that wasn't enough, is she had a growth hormone problem. If you saw this girl coming into my office during that first session, and I said, how old do you think she is? Many of you would say, is she about 6? But she's really 10. Because of this growth hormone problem, this girl had to go in and get these big growth hormone needles, these shots, 5 times a week. Eventually, it went to 7 times every day, these big shots. She had so many strikes against her. In one of my first sessions with this girl and her mother, I love to ask kids what they think their islands of competence are, and her mother was sitting in. And I said to this girl, what do you enjoy doing? What do you think you do that's pretty good? She looked at me and said, nothing. I said, no, just tell me one thing you think you do that's pretty good. Nothing. And I don't know when to stop when I'm looking for strength. So I asked her a third time. And she may have been a little annoyed when she said, Dr. Brooks, do you know what it feels like every day when I go into school and the other kids choose up the teams and I'm always the last one chosen? She said, I don't even know why the other team cheers when they beat my team. Look who they've beaten. At that moment, I felt totally depressed. The mother was depressed. The girl was depressed. I mean, this mother had just heard her own daughter saying there's nothing redeeming about herself. And I remember sitting there in this session, and I remember struggling with, what can I say that might be therapeutic at this moment? And I wasn't sure what I could say or do. But I was saved by this girl, because what happened was fascinating. As I was sitting there wondering what to say, this girl started to smile. And I remember sitting there saying, why is she smiling? And then she started to smile a little more broadly. And I said, why is she smiling? And then she was downright bubbly. And she said, Dr. Brooks. I never really thought about that question before. I just thought of something I do better than anyone in the whole school. Now I was totally intrigued. And being a bright therapist, I said, what do you think you do better than anyone in the school? And she looked at me and said, I never really thought about this before, Dr. Brooks. I take shots better than anyone in the whole school. Sure, she goes in 5 times a week. That was beautiful. But what happened next changed my life forever. I have no hesitation in telling you. After this girl said, I take shots better than anyone, her mother looks at her, looks at me and says in the most simple way, Dr. Brooks, you will find as you work with my daughter that she is one of the most courageous children you'll ever work with. And I started to cry. People say, why did you cry? I cried for every child I'd ever worked with where I failed to see their courage. And you know what I learned that day? For some children to go to school every morning is truly an act of courage. An act of courage It's like going into a war zone. For some children to be on a Little League field or a soccer field is like an act of courage. You know these kids, they're klutzy. No one wants them on the team. But my God, they're out there. Do you know what I learned from some of my patients? For some children to go to something as simple as a birthday party is an act of courage. No one wants them there. They have to invite the whole class so the kid goes. And let me tell you what we as adults sometimes do to these kids. One mother told me this. It was just out of her frustration. It's not to blame her. She went to a birthday party to pick up her son. He was all by himself. You know what she said to him? No wonder you have no friends. You always sit by yourself. You never make any effort to make any friends. You're always going to be lonely like that. Do you know how many kids come off Little League fields or soccer fields and they hear things from coaches or parents? Why don't you pay more attention? What's the matter with you? And on and on. And you know how many of our children who have had all this courage to go to school get report cards? I love this. If only Billy tried harder, he'd do better. If only Mary was a little more consistent, she'd do better. Who the heck wouldn't? So we take whatever ounce of courage they have and we destroy it. And then we wonder why kids go into drugs, have suicidal ideation, whatever. Because we, the caring adults, are not empathic and we say things that just really hurt kids. Again, not out of malevolence, but because we just didn't understand. And one of the things I learned that day was, if you can't see the acts of courage of your children, you're going to fail. If you can't see what it takes for them to get up every morning to face the world, you're going to fail. If all they hear is what they're doing wrong, they will never be resilient, because you will not be the charismatic adult in their life. You know what I always say to adults? Don't expect your kids to change unless you make changes in your approach. You see, many of us have what I call negative scripts. Many of us say the same things over and over to our kids, even if it doesn't work. This brilliant expert here, right? 4 years to Rich, did you do your homework? It didn't work, but I kept saying it. I didn't know what else to do. And one of the things I started to say is, if something doesn't work, change the script. Learn how to boost kids' self-esteem. I had a little boy, I was referred. Every day when he got off the school bus, guess what happened? Instead of coming into the school building, he hid behind the bushes. He was punished every day. And I basically said to this kid, why do you hide behind the bushes? And he looked at me as if I was a fool. He said, why do I hide behind the bushes? Isn't it obvious? I like the bushes better than I like school. Now what do? Get into a debate about the relative merits of bushes versus schools? Or do I find his island of competence? I said, what do you enjoy doing? He said, I love to take care of my pet dog. That's all I had to hear. I called the school principal, who was a real character who I knew. I said, does your school have a pet monitor? He says, what is it? I said, then you don't have it if I have to explain it. And I explained the job. He calls the kid in the next day. He said, we have many pets in this school now. We just got a new pet rabbit. That was true, purely coincidental. We have so many pets. And Dr. Brooks told me how you love taking care of pets. It would be of great help to us if you would be willing to become the first pet monitor of the school. Not only that, this character of a principal gave the kid a union card. It did. Seriously, it said, Pet Monitor Union. The kid was a scream. He came into therapy. You know what he says to me? He throws down his union card. He says, I'm union. I'm union. What is a pet monitor? The pet monitor's job was to start taking care of the pet rabbit. Soon, he started taking care of other pets. Soon, this kid who never wanted to write because he felt he had nothing to say, with the help of his wonderful teacher, he wrote a manual, how to take care of pets. The manual was bound and is part of the school library. And by the end of the year, he lectured in every classroom in that building on how to take care of pets, and he never hid behind the bushes. See, that principal had the courage to change the script. I was once confronted with a kid. I had to change the script. Kid comes in, an angry teenager, learning problems, attentional problems. His opening comment to me was, you are the ugliest looking shrink I've ever seen in my whole life. That's his opening comment. My hands clenched. All my Brooklyn days came back. I felt like saying, let me show you something, kid. I said, am I really that ugly? Because I said, you got to do something different. Am I really that ugly? He says, worse than that. I said, would it help if you didn't have to look at me? He said, it would help a great deal. I had a very large closet in my office. I was a little more reckless than I am now. And so I said, then you shouldn't have to look at me if I'm that ugly. And I went into the closet. Yes, I did. 3 or 4 times during the session, he screams out, "You still in there?" I don't know where he thought I was going. But I guess it was so different. I mean, if your therapist went into a closet, I mean, what would you do? I thought I was brilliant. He sat there shell-shocked. I thought I was brilliant. I really did. But at the end of the session, when I opened the door and I said it's over and he left, I had my first real anxiety attack. When I imagined what his mother said to him in the waiting room. He had seen 2 therapists before me, and I imagined the mother saying, "I hope you didn't give Dr. Brooks a lot of bull. And I hope you were straight with him and started to talk about your problems." And the kid saying to the mother, "How could I? He sat in the closet." Before I could even call the mother to explain my rather unique approach, she called me. It was one of the worst phone calls of my career. She started with that phony laughter. "Ha, ha, 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 ha." I said, "What is it?" She said, "Wait till you hear what my lying son told me." I said, "What did he tell you?" "He told me you sat in the closet the entire session." You know what I felt like saying? He's lying. But I really couldn't. The second session, it got worse. He came in, he said, "Get in the closet." I said, "What have I unleashed here?" By the third session, he says to me, "You're not quite as ugly as I thought you were, Brooks, but I don't want to have to look at you in my office." I said, "Your office?" He said, "Hey, I've been here for 2 sessions. You've been in the closet. It's my office." And soon we became buddies. I'm not saying you always have to do that, but do you have the courage to change? If you've been saying and doing something over and over again, do you have the courage to change? Because what good is having strategies? What good is having theories unless you have the willingness to say, whether or not my kid gets better will have as much to do with what I do. Whether or not my student gets better will have as much to do with what I do as what they bring in to the situation. One of the most important things I had to learn was that if we are to save our children, we must truly, as difficult as this is, accept our children for who they are rather than what we want them to be or hope they would be. This is so easy for me to say, but I'm the first one to tell you I couldn't accept my son Richard because he was an underachiever, and I almost lost him. Children were not put on this earth to make us feel like good parents. If any of us had children to make us feel like good parents, we were very mistaken. And children certainly were not put on this earth for us to lead our lives through. Every child is different at birth. Did you know this? I didn't know it years ago. Some children are born shy. Do you know some children come out of the womb moody and some don't? Some love to be held. Some you could spend 1 minute of an hour with and they'll basically say to you as a parent, "You're so giving." And some kids you spend 59 minutes of an hour and they'll tell you about the 1 minute you didn't spend. This is from birth. We haven't even had a chance to screw them up yet. Now, I want to bring up this point because of the aggravation I experience about this point. I've had teachers say to me, "Dr. Brooks, we know kids are different, but in our school we treat each child the same. Because how would the other kids feel?" One of the things I always say to teachers is, I respect the fact that you don't want kids to feel things are unfair in your room. So if I were running a school, I have what I call an orientation period. And I'll tell you what I mean by this. I truly feel that if I was running a school, I would tell the teachers, you cannot take out any books for the first 2 or 3 days of school. Your first priority is to create a climate in the school where you think about what is going to be that atmosphere where all kids will thrive. And I've actually done this with teachers. I've actually had teachers, before any kid could think things are unfair, I've actually had teachers say this to the class the first day. All of you are very different. Some of you can run fast, some of you run slow, some of you read fast. And I share with kids I'm a very slow reader. I am. We're all very different. And because you're so different, guess what? During the year, some of you may end up doing more homework than others. Some of you may have different kinds of work than others. But that's because you're all different. And then I actually have teachers say this. But at any time during the year, if any of you feel that things are not fair, if I'm not treating you fairly, it's going to be your responsibility to let me know. And you know what teachers have told me? When they bring it up as an issue before any kid thinks about it, it becomes a dead issue. because the teacher said, I know this is how it is. When I talk about accommodations, I'm not talking about anything earth-shaking. You know what the kind of accommodations I think about? I personally believe there should be a maximum time kids spend on homework. For some kids, that may mean doing one problem. For others, they can do 10. I work with too many kids who really get turned off to learning because they can't do it. They struggle and struggle. And then it leads to such parental strife with them. I am the firmest believer that some kids have to get up every 15 minutes in a classroom. And when they get up, they have to move around. See, these are the kinds of accommodations where no child will feel in a class that I am not being accepted. And I think we, as teachers, we can do things to help a child feel that way. You know, one of the things parents often ask me, how do you get kids to be more responsible? They don't do their chores. Who the heck wants to do chores? You know the best way I found kids to follow through on something, and I've mentioned this several times in different ways, by having them do jobs which help them to feel they make a difference in this world. I had a little boy when I was principal of the school at this psychiatric hospital. He kept trying to break the lights. For 3 weeks, I threw him in the quiet room. Finally, I said, Bob, you got to change this negative script. And he hadn't read the book on reverse psychology yet. So one day I said to him, I've told you not to try to break the lights, but what I haven't told you is this. I've never met a child more interested in lights than you. It is a gift. He looked at me and says, it's a gift? I said, it is a wonderful gift. And because you have this gift, I would like you to become the first light monitor of the school. And you know what? After that, he never tried to break the lights. If I was to ask you what contributions your children think, your students, your own sons and daughters, what contributions they make to the world, could they immediately rattle off 3 or 4 things? Because if a child feels they make no difference in the world, then their self-esteem is going to be very, very low. Every child should go into a school feeling there's at least one job in the school, that because they have this job, the school is a better place. I went into one school, every 5th grader was a math or reading or science or sports buddy with every kindergarten and 1st grader. It was wonderful. And these kids felt they were making a difference. So one of the best ways to teach responsibility, I think, is providing our kids with opportunities where they can shine and realize they make a difference. When I go into schools, you know what I ask teachers all the time also? I said, if I were to interview the children in your school and to ask them what choice they had in the last week in your class, could they immediately tell me some of the choices? If I asked them what decisions they've made about their own education, could they tell me? Do you know there are children who are not in at IEP meetings? How could you have a meeting without the kid there, unless they truly don't want to be there? I involve kids right away. I was giving a workshop in the Midwest, and you know what a group of teachers there did? One of the best ways they found for kids to do homework, and it sounds so simple. They said one of the best ways is to not ask kids to do all their homework. Whenever we give homework, we'll give, say, 8 problems. We'll always say to the kids in the class, it's your choice. You're only going to do 5. You select the 5. And another teacher said, and you know what I do? If they've done their work for 2 weeks, then the next week, it's their choice. 1 day a week, they don't have to do their homework. And I said, you're asking the kids to do less. What have you discovered? And you know what they said? The more we've given choice and asked them to do less, the more they're doing. Because you see, they have a say in it. And I started saying, when you give kids choices from a very early age, ones you can live with, what you're doing is you're promoting a sense of autonomy. What you're saying is, within reason now, you don't give a kid's choices they can't handle. I have faith in your ability to do this. Discipline could either destroy a child's self-esteem or it could totally enhance a child's self-esteem. I think many of us don't seriously think enough about what is discipline. You know, I'll often ask audiences, what is the main function of discipline? I almost always get one answer, which I think is right. I know it's right. And that answer is, we need to have rules, we need limits. Kids have to know where they stand in our homes and schools. For issues of safety and security. And I say, that's right. And then I say, what is the other main function or purpose of discipline? And many people don't think of this. One of the main functions for me of discipline is to promote self-discipline, which means that even if you're not there, your children will incorporate some of your values. And even if you're not there, they will follow through on it. We've got to recognize discipline stems from the word disciple. It's a teaching process. It is not to hurt our children, it's to teach them. And one of the things I discovered is we have to try to prevent problems from occurring in the first place. I recently gave a talk, and a mother said to me, Dr. Brooks, what should I do? My kid always has tantrums in supermarkets. I do everything right. I tell him before he goes in, you can't have anything. And you know what I said? Because I've learned over the years. I said, don't take him to supermarkets. He's not ready to handle it yet. Some people, say, you really said that? I say, yeah. There are situations kids should not be in. There are kids who are asked to sit still in school, and when they don't, recess is taken away. And then they act up. I could have told them the kid was going to act up. Some of the best discipline is when you prevent problems from emerging in the first place. And we must remember that as well. One of the best ways for kids to follow rules in homes and schools, if we really believe in self-discipline, is this. When we actually sit down with children at home and have family meetings, or we sit down with kids in a classroom, and we actually ask the kids, what rules do you think we need at home or at school? What is the best way of remembering the rules so we're not nagging you all the time? And what should the consequences be if you break rules? You know what one boy told me in a family therapy meeting? His parents kept punishing him because he forgot to take his medicine. So I said to this kid, you need them to tell you? He said, no, they're always on my back. So I told the parents, kids love me. Parents, I'm not sure about all the time. I told the parents, no, don't bug him anymore. Don't remind him anymore. But I'm not that naive. So about a minute later, I said to this kid, and I said it this way, I know I shouldn't bring this up because I know you're not going to forget to take your medicine. But just in case you do. He said, I'm not. I said, that's why I don't even want to bring it up, so forget I brought it up. But of course, then he said, what were you going to say? I said, what if you should forget? Your parents are going to get upset. He says, well, I like them to talk to me. I said, is there any other way they could remind you? I couldn't believe it. He starts to think, he says, let him hold up a sign. He did. Do you know what did away with the problem? They made a sign. And they had to discuss when they could hold it up. 7:25 every morning if he forgot. Take your medicine. Do you know in schools during that orientation period, the best way I have found to help kids learn rules? I say to teachers during that orientation period, please ask the kids what rules they think you need in the class. Ask them how they would remember it. Ask them what the consequences should be. I'm going to ask this group, what do you think research has found is the most difficult problem when you actually engage kids in making up rules and consequences? Anyone want to take a guess? Yes? They're too strict and too many. People always say to me they're going to get away with murder. Let me tell you. I went into one special needs class. I said, what would you do if someone stole something of yours? This kid blurts out, chop off their hand, Dr. Brooks. They will never do it again. Because many of them think very rigidly. You see, we want kids to learn. We want kids to not feel things are shoved down their throat. They have to understand why there are rules. Is it a struggle? Of course. I think one of the reasons many children are not resilient and have lost hope is because they feel like total failures. It's because they are so fearful of making mistakes and being humiliated further that, quotes, they don't even try. And I started wondering, how do you help kids overcome the fear of mistakes? You know one of my favorite questions to kids? When your mother or father makes a mistake, if something doesn't go right, or your teacher makes a mistake, if something doesn't go right, how do they handle it? You see, we serve as models. Do you know what I've heard? I've heard things like they throw things, they scream at each other, they don't talk to me, they don't do this. One of my favorites was this little boy. When I said, when your parents get upset, when they make a mistake, what do they do? Kid looks up at me with these wide eyes, he says, what's a double martini? I said, what do you mean? He says, every time they get upset, they say, let's have a double martini. This is not a good model. See how much I learned getting a PhD? It's not a good model. Hey, you know what I say? Your kid spills something, You know, I don't care if it's 10 days in a row. You know what your job is? Bring out 2 cloths and help them clean it up. Because then you teach kids part of growing up is you're going to spill things. If your kids do these things, I think it's very important that we help kids learn that mistakes are experiences to learn from rather than feel defeated by. You know, for the teachers in the room, but this is true of parents too. During that orientation period, you know one of my favorite questions I have teachers ask kids? Before they give any work, this is one of my favorite questions. I love teachers to ask a class, who in this class thinks they're going to make a mistake and not understand something this year? And before any kid could raise his or her hand, you know what I have the teacher do? I have the teacher raise theirs. And then I actually have the teacher say to the class, why do you think I even brought this up? Some kids will be bright. They'll say, you're worried about how we're going to deal with mistakes. And I say, great, tell them that's it. And if they don't bring it up, say, you know why I brought it up? I brought it up because I remember when I was a student. I remember times I was so scared of answering a question that I wouldn't raise my hand because I thought I was going to be wrong. And I actually have teachers say to kids, what can I do as your teacher and what can you do as a class, and no one will ever be afraid of making a mistake in here. We've got to do away with the fear of making mistakes. It's one of the greatest fears. Ask yourself, how do I help my child deal with mistakes? What am I saying or doing? How could a child be resilient if they're always attacked for spilling things, not knowing things, not listening closely? What you're saying to your kid, you become very moralistic and accusatory, saying it's your fault. You should get your act together. And it destroys kids. A number of years ago, a friend of mine sent me an article written by a psychologist. And the article said many adults have a praise deficit. And I was fascinated by this phrase, praise deficit. At first I became defensive. I said, no, most people don't have a praise deficit. Let me take a quick show of hands. How many of you in this room ever wrote to one of your favorite high school teachers to tell them what a wonderful job they did for you? A few. How many of you in the last 3 months, out of the blue, not at a holiday time or a birthday, called one of your coworkers or wrote them a note just to say, did I ever tell you how much I appreciate working with you? A few more hands. I never did any of this. I'm this nice guy. You know what? I want to make a point. Those of us who don't do it, we have a praise deficit. Do you know what I found? It takes very little to make someone feel special and appreciated. Our children may need just a little time to feel special and appreciated. Our husbands, our wives, our own parents. I grew up in a home where there was never a praise deficit. Both my parents are immigrants. They had the equivalent of maybe, a 6th grade education. But they always overcame a praise deficit. It shows you formal education has very little to do with parenting skills. People sometimes say, how did they make you feel special? I say, my father, the true immigrant story, worked 70 hours a week in a little store he owned in New York. But when he was with you, he had really undivided attention. He didn't read a paper while he was talking to you. He didn't watch TV. He was with you. One of the ways my parents especially made me and my 3 older brothers feel special is, did you grow up in a home like this? They kept a file on each of us. Not for the FBI or CIA, a file. Everything went in the file. Birthday cards, report cards, you name it. This may sound a little crazy, but as I was growing up, I said, I've got a special place. It's called a file. Hey, I got a file. My brothers have a file. I got a file. I'm very special. My mother died 16 and a half years ago. After she died, my father said to me and my brothers, you know, boys, he was 76 at the time, you know, boys, this file was very important to your mom, but it's equally important to me, so I'm going to keep it going. And we said, great, Dad. 76 years old, he's keeping our files going. My father died 6.5 years ago at the age of 86. I would like to share with you the last words he said to me and how I wish every one of our kids could hear his thoughts and sentiments. He was 86 years old. He had moved from New York to Florida. My wife and I were vacationing in Florida. And when I was getting ready to go back to Boston, my father hugged and kissed me goodbye and said something to me that brought me to tears because it was so sweet, so gentle. It turned out it was the last words he was ever to say to me. Because when I got back to Boston just a couple days later, I got this emergency call. He had become ill very suddenly, and I raced back to Florida, and when I got there, he was comatose and he died the next morning. So you never know when it's the last time. This 86-year-old immigrant's last words to his middle-aged son, and it was so simple, and I'll never forget them. He said, now Bob, remember, when you get back to Boston, if you have anything you could send me for the file, please do. I always enjoy reading about you and hearing from you. To his dying days, he made me feel special. See, when people say to me, what goes into resiliency and self-esteem? It's helping our children feel special. What special times do you give your children? You know what I love? Many parents of special needs kids, you know what they say to me in therapy? We never do anything as a family. And you know what I always say? Why would you want to? Why would you want to? Those are some of the most miserable times. I remember on Sundays when I'd say to Richard and Douglas, time to do something as a family, they'd say, why? So I'd force them into the car. We'd be 2 blocks from home. Did you ever have this? 2 blocks from home. I'd pull over the car. I'd say, if you two don't stop fighting in the back seat, we're not going to do anything as a family. They'd say, good, let's go home. You know what I'm going to ask each of you to do? For the teachers in the room and parents, what do you do with each child alone? For the parents in the room, you know one of the nicest things to say to your kid? I don't care what age. When I'm with you, it's such a special time. And this is maybe easier to say to young ones. It's such a special time that even if the phone rings, I'm not going to get it. How many of you have ever answered the phone when you're talking and playing with your kid? Why? First of all, often it's bad news on the other side. It's probably the school calling anyway about some problem. Why do you want to hear this? For the teachers in the room, you know one of the best ways to help kids feel very comfortable in your class? In the beginning of the year, during that orientation period, spend 5 to 10 minutes with each child alone. Just 5 minutes even. Get to know them. Then you have a personal relationship. It is one of the most powerful, powerful things. That's why my wife and I have kept files on our kids. You should see what went in their files. I coached my sons in basketball for 8 years. Any of you coach, you don't even have to coach. After every season, every kid got a note from me. After every game, I called at least 3 kids just to thank them for coming out. What did it take me? 15 seconds? These kids didn't want to talk. Thanks, coach. And then they hung up. They didn't even know what else to say. The 4th year I coached Douglas, I wrote him a longer note than usual. Dear Doug, it's been such a pleasure to see your growth as a player these past 4 years. He had worked so hard, he had practiced so hard, so I wrote him this long note. Just like every other kid, but his was even longer because he had worked so hard. And I said, don't just leave it on the kitchen table, mail it. So I mailed it a couple days later when I come home. There is Douglas, the letter is opened. I truly expected him to say, Dad, where can I nominate you for Father of the Year? He said nothing. I felt like saying, excuse me, Doug, do you realize the implications of this particular letter? He said nothing. And so I rationalized. I said, it's no longer overcoming a praise deficit. It's his 4th year, his 4th letter. It doesn't mean anything to him, on and on. I was still annoyed. And I was going to say something, but when I'm not sure what to say and it's not an emergency, I said, sleep on it. I'm glad I slept on it. The next day when I came home, there on the kitchen table was a letter from Douglas to me. The first thing I noticed when I opened it up was he predated his letter, so it looked like he wrote his letter the day before I wrote mine. Dear Dad, it's been such a pleasure to see your growth as a coach these past 3 He took my exact letter, changed player and coach, and you know what he said? Dad, would you put both of these in the file? You know, both my sons had the same reaction when they were seniors in high school. They looked through their file like never before. I drew pictures like this in 1st grade. This is my 3rd grade report card. We're saving their lives. In many different ways when I say that. We save their lives, their memories, and we make them feel important.
Hi, I work in the Learning Disabilities Department in a high school, and I see what you talk about with the lack of hope and that sort of thing. I want to know how you get some of these kids to be the pet monitor, to get them involved, because
Right.
I think that would be a key, but I don't know how to get them to
Well,
do that.
because, no, it's a wonderful question. Some of these kids have so given up that they don't even feel worthwhile. When I've used, and I use it all the time, as you can tell, when I use techniques like involving kids and helping others, one of the most powerful ways I have found with high school kids is to actually have them go down and work in the elementary school for a few hours a week. Sometimes some of these kids in their own environment do not feel as comfortable, which is interesting. You know what it's like? Many kids with special needs, you know what I hear from parents? They can't get along with kids their own age, but they're great with younger children. And I've gotten into arguments about this. You know what I say? If they're great with younger children, that's where you start. At least give them an opportunity to see that they can do something effectively. And maybe then eventually they could do it with people their own age.
I I'm the mother of a 10-year-old boy who is ADHD with learning disabilities. He has a 13-year-old sister, and my question of you is sibling rivalry issue. I mean, how do you handle these?
I think it's not unusual where one child has some difficulties and another doesn't, that there's going to be a lot of feelings. Sometimes where I've seen it even more painful is the 13-year-old who can't read much and the 10-year-old sibling who is zooming ahead of their older brother or sister. And I've had kids in my office like that, and the best I can say is, one, I'm always empathic. I tell them, I would feel just as miserable as you do, but we have to figure out ways where your skills are. Probably the most effective thing, if I look at my own children, as well as a lot of families I worked with, is helping kids feel special. When my kids were teenagers, I said they don't need special times anymore. They needed it more than ever. And every Wednesday night, I rushed home like a madman. And one week I took Richard, and one week I took Douglas out to eat. It was wonderful, an hour and a half of no interruptions. Richard only had one rule: you can't mention school. And I said, that is fine. I don't want to get indigestion.
Hello. How can I explain to my daughter that she has a learning disability without hurting her self-esteem?
I wish we could sit down with a child and just say, really what I try to do is we all learn differently. We use the word disability to help us to know that some kids may need more help in some areas than others. Whenever I sit down with a child, just to elaborate even more on some points, whenever I sit down with a child, I never want to somehow minimize the problems they're having. I used to be too reassuring at times. Things will be okay. I am very straight with kids. I say it may always take you twice as long to read a book. It takes me twice as long to read a book. I tell them that. But that doesn't mean you can't accomplish a lot. Ask your daughter, what does it mean to her when she hears she has a learning disability? What have you heard about it? Some kids have all kinds of fantasies. Maybe we just have to correct the fantasy. Some kids feel it's a label that's forever going to weigh them down. I tell them it makes a difference in your life, but it does not have to continue to weigh you down. It's not a death sentence. And some kids see it that way. By the way, some parents see it that way. I've seen some parents in my office, oh my God, my kid has a learning disability, it's like they're never going to achieve. The kid picks up on it. So as parents, we also need help in understanding what that means. But thank
I
you.
even lied, you know, I told her I'm going to a meeting. I didn't tell her that I'm
Oh, tonight?
Yeah, she doesn't know.
Yeah, no.
So.
I've known parents who have brought a kid to see me in therapy, and they always tell the siblings, he's going to a dentist. How often do you go to a dentist? You know, and he's going to this or this. But you see, part of what I'll say to you, and I don't know you, so I hope this comes across in a very caring way. Your comfort in being able to discuss it with your daughter may help her to be more comfortable. And it's a challenge we have. That's why, without even knowing you, I said where I've seen a lot of difficulties is for a parent to even say to another person, my son, my daughter has a learning disability. They have ADD. There's nothing to be ashamed about. It's a neurobiological kind of thing. And I think what we have to learn is this is not an issue of shame. It's an issue of us understanding and educating others. So someday, whenever I come back, you tell her you're going to hear Dr. Brooks, who's speaking about learning disabilities. Wouldn't it be wonderful if 20 years from now we could reconvene, all of us, and we would bring in the children we're raising and working with now? They would look 20 years older, we would look exactly the same, right? And I told your sons and daughters and students, I said to them, you know, there's this notion of a charismatic adult, an adult who really saves kids' lives, from whom children gather strength. And I said to them, look back 20 years, now it's 20 years in the future, look back 20 years ago, who were the charismatic adults in your life? Wouldn't it be wonderful if without hesitation, each one of our children and students, without hesitation, would mention our name? Because you see, this is the legacy we leave our children. The legacy is this. This is our future. The greatest legacy I can think of leaving children is to give them a fighting chance in life, to know they've been loved and respected, to really feel we have been the charismatic adults in their lives. It is even more so, it's so for every child, but it is even more so for children who struggle with learning and attentional problems. Within each one of you, you have the power to really become the charismatic adult in your child's life. What I always say to people is, please use that power in the most constructive way, because the end result will be some children who will truly be, as they get older, some of the most resilient adults you will ever meet. Thank you very much.